She was invisible. That was the whole point of the uniform. Press it smooth, pin the name tag straight, keep your eyes down and your voice lower. In a house like this one, 6 bedrooms, a private beach, a wine cellar worth more than her old apartment, invisibility wasn't just a rule. It was survival. Talia Grant had survived worse than invisibility. She'd survived a courtroom that called her a thief. She'd survived the morning she found her office cleared out and a security guard waiting by the elevator. She'd survived the particular silence of a phone that had been full of colleagues on a Friday and was completely dead by Monday. What she hadn't counted on was a 7-year-old boy named Sue and a drunk man in a suit that cost more than her monthly salary. And she definitely hadn't counted on the way his father looked at her afterward. Not with gratitude, not with pity, but with something that unsettled her far more than either. Minho Yu had everything money could build. The right lawyers, the right zip codes, the right address on every document that mattered. What he did not have, what no amount of money had ever managed to buy him, was someone who looked at his world and refused to be impressed by it. Until her, what happens when a man who controls everything meets the one woman he cannot control? And what does it cost both of them to find out? If this story already has your heart beating faster, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to Wisdom Series, contemporary romance for real life, so you never miss a story. And before we begin, drop a comment. Have you ever protected someone even when it cost you everything? Tell me. I read every single one. Miami in October had a particular cruelty to it. The kind of heat that should have broken by now but hadn't, pressing against the skin like something personal. Talia Grant stood at the service entrance of the U residence at 7:15 in the morning, her uniform already beginning to feel like a second skin she hadn't chosen, and told herself, for the 100th time, that this was temporary. Temporary. That word had been doing a lot of heavy lifting for the past 11 months. She was 34 years old. She had passed the Florida bar at 26. By 31, she had made senior associate at Harmon & Kress, one of Miami's most respected corporate firms, handling compliance cases that other lawyers found too complicated and too dry to want. Talia had loved the dryness. She had loved the precision of it, the way the law, when applied correctly, left no room for ambiguity. The irony was not lost on her that it was ambiguity, the manufactured, weaponized kind, that had ended everything. It had started with a client file, a pharmaceutical client, a set of contracts, and an allegation that Talia had altered billing records to inflate her hours. The accusation had come internally, from a colleague named Derek Voss, who sat 3 offices down and smiled at her every morning in a way that had always felt like performance. The investigation had taken 6 weeks. The termination had taken 40 minutes. The bar grievance process had taken another 4 months, and while the inquiry was technically still ongoing, technically, she had not been disbarred. The suspension of her license meant she could not practice, could not earn, could not be the person she had spent 8 years building. She had sold the condo in Brickell. She had deferred her student loans. And when a placement agency had called about a full-time domestic position in a private residence, North Miami Beach, live-in optional, competitive rate, she had held the phone very still for a long moment before saying yes. The U residence was not what she had imagined, and she had tried hard not to imagine it. 6,000 square feet of glass and pale stone, sitting on the edge of Biscayne Bay like it owned the water. A pool on one side, a private dock on the other, and a kitchen larger than the entire floor plan of the apartment she'd rented in law school. The household ran with 4 staff: Talia, a chef named Gerald, a groundskeeper named Paco, who arrived at 6 and left before lunch, and a woman named Mrs. Lim, who served as the household manager and had given Talia her orientation on day 1 with the warmth of a tax audit. The owner, Talia was told, spent 60% of his time in Seoul. He was in Miami now for a 3-month stay. Business matters, Mrs. Lim said, without elaborating. He had a son, 7 years old. His name was Sue. He was well-behaved and did not require much attention from staff, but staff should be aware of his schedule and his preferences. Talia had nodded and written nothing down, because she remembered everything. It was the one thing Derek Voss had not been able to take from her. She met Sue on her third day. She was polishing the hallway console table. One of those tasks that felt punishing not because it was hard, but because she was so clearly overqualified for it, and her brain knew it, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Small ones. She looked up to find a boy watching her from the fourth step, his head tilted at the specific angle of a child who is assessing something carefully before deciding whether to commit to it. She kept polishing. After about 30 seconds, he said, in English that was careful and clear and slightly formal, "You missed a spot." She looked at the table. "Where?" He came down one step. "Right there. At the edge. It still looks cloudy." She looked again. He was right. She buffed it out. "Thank you." He nodded, satisfied, and went back upstairs. That was the entire conversation, and it was somehow the best one she'd had in weeks. Minho Yu, in those first 2 weeks, was mostly an absence. He left early. He returned late. When he was home, he occupied his study with the door closed, or made calls on the back terrace in Korean, walking back and forth in the kind of focused, measured way that suggested his mind never fully stopped moving. He acknowledged staff the way someone acknowledges furniture, not unkindly but without real attention. A nod when he passed. A word to Mrs. Lim when something needed addressing. The first time he spoke directly to Talia, it was to tell her she had placed the daily brief, a summary of household messages Mrs. Lim compiled each morning, on the wrong side of his desk. "Left side," he said. No greeting, no eye contact. He was already turning back to his laptop. "I'll remember that," Talia said. Something in her tone made him look up. Just briefly. Just long enough for their eyes to meet once, and for her to not look away first. He went back to his screen. She moved the brief to the left side and walked out. In the kitchen, Gerald raised an eyebrow at her. Most people flinch when he does that. "I'm not most people," she said, and poured herself a glass of water. The business dinner was scheduled for the third Saturday of October. Sue's birthday was October 7th, making him 7 years and 18 days old, on the night everything changed. The guest list had been managed entirely by Minho's assistant in Seoul and relayed to Mrs. Lim by email. 12 guests, formal, arrival at 7, dinner at 8, bar service until 11. Talia had been assigned front of house for the evening, receiving coats, directing guests, maintaining the flow between the entry and the sitting room. She did not particularly mind it. It was the kind of task that required attention and discretion, which she had in abundance, and it kept her visible enough that she could monitor the rooms without being invited into any conversation. The guests arrived in clusters. Business contacts, mostly. She could tell by the quality of the silences between them, the way they laughed at each other's jokes a half beat too fast. There were 2 women who appeared to be partners of guests, not guests themselves, and who clustered near the fireplace with their champagne and spoke in low voices about nothing in particular. There was a man named Weston Park, she caught his name from Mrs. Lim's list, who arrived last and alone, and immediately sought out the bar. Weston Park was, by any external measure, impressive. He was a partner at a development firm that did business with U International. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms as though he owned them, which was not the same thing as the way Minho moved through rooms. There was a difference, Talia had noticed, between a man who moves like he owns the room because he actually owns it, and a man who moves that way because he needs everyone to believe it. By 9:30, Weston Park had owned the bar for 2 hours. Talia was collecting glasses from the side table near the hallway when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly, but an absence of the right sounds. The particular quiet of a child who has stopped moving. She turned. Sue was at the end of the hallway, near the base of the second staircase. He had come down from his room. She'd seen him earlier in the evening, curious about the guests, the way children are curious about things that are supposed to be adult and serious. And he was backed against the wall now, very still, while Weston Park leaned over him. Park was not shouting. He was speaking in the blurred, confidential way of someone who has had too much and thinks he is being charming. She could not hear the words. She did not need to. She recognized the posture of a child who wants to disappear. She was already moving. She crossed the hallway in 12 steps. She counted them later, without meaning to, and placed herself between Sue and the man. Not aggressively, not with a scene. She simply made herself a wall. "Mr. Park, I believe Mr. Yu was looking for you in the sitting room." Park blinked at her. His eyes were unfocused in that particular way. "I was just talking to the kid." "Of course. Dinner is being served, though, and I'd hate for you to miss the first course." She smiled the way she had learned to smile in depositions, the smile that gives away nothing and invites nothing. He stared at her for a moment. She did not move. She had handled hostile witnesses in federal court. She was not going to be moved by a drunk man in a hallway. "Fine." He straightened, smoothed his jacket, walked back toward the sitting room with the careful dignity of someone pretending they're not drunk. She turned to Sue. He was looking at her. His expression was the expression of someone who has just been surprised by something they didn't know they needed. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Good. Go back up. Use the back stairs. I'll tell Mrs. Lim you said goodnight." He went. She watched until he reached the top of the stairs. When she turned back, Minho Yu was standing at the other end of the hallway. She had no way of knowing how long he had been there. His face was completely unreadable. Not cold, the way it usually was, but still in a different way. The way water goes still before something surfaces. Their eyes met across 15 feet of hallway. She gave him a small nod, professional, appropriate, and walked back toward the sitting room to collect more glasses. She told herself, very firmly, that the look on his face meant nothing. She did not entirely succeed. He found her the next morning. She was in the kitchen at 6:50, ahead of Gerald, making coffee because she had not slept particularly well, and the kitchen was the only room in the house that felt, at this hour, like it had no one else's energy in it. She heard his footsteps. She was beginning to recognize them, the particular rhythm of someone who walks like every step is decided in advance, and braced herself without letting her posture show it. He sat down at the kitchen island, not at the dining table, not at his desk. The kitchen island, where the staff ate. She poured a second cup without being asked and set it in front of him. He looked at the coffee, then at her. Then he said, "Sue told me what happened. There isn't much to tell. I redirected a guest. You put yourself between my son and a man who has the kind of lawyers that make problems disappear. I was doing my job. That is not in your job description." She wrapped her hands around her own mug. "Maybe it should be." A pause. The kind that has weight. Outside, the bay was flat and early silver. "I'd like to compensate you," he said. "A bonus." "For last night?" "No, thank you." He looked at her, the way people look at a math problem that has produced the wrong answer. "I beg your pardon." "I appreciate the gesture. But I didn't do it for compensation. So it wouldn't feel right to take any." The silence that followed was different from the silences she had catalogued before. This one was genuinely uncertain. Minho Yu, she was fairly sure, did not often find himself uncertain. "Is there something else you'd want?" It was not quite arrogance. More like someone trying to locate the currency of an unfamiliar transaction. "No." She picked up her mug. "How does Sue take his breakfast?" Another pause. "Scrambled eggs, no pepper, toast without butter. He decided last month that he doesn't like it." A beat. "He changes his mind about things frequently." "Good," she said. "That means he's thinking." She went to the refrigerator and started on the eggs. He stayed at the island for another 4 minutes. She didn't count exactly, but her internal clock, honed by years of billable hours, was precise, and then he left. She exhaled once, slowly, and told herself nothing had shifted. She was wrong. Over the following 2 weeks, Minho began appearing in rooms where she was working, not hovering. Nothing so obvious. He would pass through the sitting room while she was dusting the bookshelves and stop to take a call near the window. He would come into the kitchen for water at odd hours when Gerald wasn't in. He would appear on the terrace in the evenings with documents, at exactly the time she was returning the outdoor furniture cushions to the storage bench. She noticed. She was a lawyer. Noticing patterns was in her blood. She said nothing about it. She did her work, but she stopped being quite so careful to look away when he was near, and she didn't analyze what that meant. Sue, meanwhile, had decided they were friends. He began appearing in whatever room she was in with a book under his arm, sitting down cross-legged in the nearest corner and reading without commentary, as though her presence were simply a comfortable fact. On the fourth time this happened, she asked him what he was reading. He held up the cover. A thick encyclopedia of world geography. Any particular reason? I want to know where everything is. Delivered with complete seriousness. That's a good reason. She went back to her work. Then, what country are you on? Brazil. Did you know the Amazon River discharges more fresh water into the ocean than any other river on Earth? I did not know that. It's called a megadelta. Also did not know that. He seemed satisfied. He turned a page. These became the conversations she looked forward to most in her day, and she held that fact carefully, the way you hold something fragile. It was Gerald who broke the seal. He was the kind of man who observed everything and commented on most of it, and he had been watching Talia and the Yu household dynamics with the satisfaction of someone watching a very slow chess match. On a Tuesday afternoon, while she was prepping the dining room for a private lunch, he leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. He asked me about you this morning. She kept setting the table. About what? Your background before here. I told him I didn't know much, and he should ask you himself. She placed a fork with slightly more precision than the task required. That's fine. He will ask you himself, you know. He's working up to it. Gerald, I'm just saying. I'm aware of what you're saying. He pushed off the doorframe. You know what your problem is, Talia. Not the lawyer thing, not the job thing. You've decided that needing something means losing, and so you've made yourself impossible to help. She looked at him. He looked back, unrepentant. You're a chef, she said, not a therapist. I contain multitudes, he said, and went back to his kitchen. She stood at the table for a moment longer. Then she finished setting it. Minho asked her that evening. She was in the study. He had asked her to retrieve a document folder from the filing cabinet, one of the few tasks Mrs. Lim had specifically designated to Talia given her ability to read and organize complex paperwork, when he came in and sat at his desk. What did you do before this? Not aggressively. Not the way Derek Voss used to ask things, with the implication of an answer he had already decided on. Just the question. She found the folder, set it on the left side of his desk. Corporate law. He absorbed that. Here in Miami? Yes. Why did you leave? She straightened, looked at him directly. I was accused of billing fraud. The accusation was false. My license is under suspension while the inquiry is ongoing. I expect to be reinstated, but the timeline is what it is. She said it cleanly, the way she would have stated facts in court. No apology in it, no flinching. He held her gaze. Who made the accusation? A colleague. And you believe the inquiry will vindicate you? I know it will. I kept copies of everything. I always do. A pause. I was a compliance lawyer. I understood what documentation meant before most people in that firm understood what compliance meant. Something moved in his expression. Not pity. She would have shut down at pity. Something more like recognition. I can connect you with... He began. No. She said it before he could finish the sentence. Quietly, but with all the firmness she had. Thank you. But no. I have attorneys. I'm handling it. What I need is time and clean records, not intervention from someone who doesn't know the full picture. She held his gaze. I'm not a problem you need to solve, Mr. Yu. The silence stretched between them, He leaned back slightly in his chair. "No," he said at last. "You are not." She walked to the door. At the threshold she paused, without turning. "Left side of the desk," she said. "I remember." She heard something, almost a sound, almost not, that might have been the beginning of a laugh, cut short. She kept walking. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall for exactly 3 seconds and felt something she hadn't felt in 11 months. Seen. Min-ho Yu had not always been the man who lived in glass houses and walked through rooms without touching them. He was 38 years old. He had built Yu International from his father's mid-sized import business into something that touched 6 continents, and he had done it through a combination of intelligence, work ethic, and a willingness to make decisions that other people found too uncomfortable to make. He had been, for most of his adult life, certain of almost everything. The certainty had cracked when his wife died. Ji-yeon had been gone for 3 years. Sue had been 4. It was a car accident. The kind that happens to other people. The kind that is over before the mind can catch up to the fact of it. Min-ho had been in Tokyo when it happened, and by the time he was on a plane home, she was already gone. He had spent the flight sitting completely still, not sleeping, not eating, trying to work out what a person was supposed to do with a fact that large. He had not worked it out entirely. He suspected he never would. But Sue had been there, and Sue needed practical things, meals and school and bedtime, and someone to tell him that the world was still fundamentally ordered, even when it wasn't. And so Min-ho had learned to pour everything into structure, into systems, into the clean, controllable architecture of business and routine. He had not, in 3 years, met anyone who made him feel anything he couldn't organize into a category. Until the woman who refused his bonus and set his coffee and looked at him like he was a person, rather than a position. He found himself thinking about the bar inquiry she'd mentioned, not because he intended to interfere. He had understood, clearly, that she would not tolerate it, but because something about the shape of the accusation nagged at him. He knew the legal landscape in Miami's corporate world. He had been a client of enough firms to recognize the textures of how they operated. He mentioned it to his attorney in Seoul on a call in late October, offhandedly. Just the structure of it. A compliance attorney at a mid-sized firm, billing fraud allegation, suspension pending inquiry. His attorney said, "That sounds like the Harmon and Cress situation." Min-ho went very still. "Why do you say that?" "We had dealings with Harmon and Cress 2 years ago. A contracts matter. One of their associates flagged an irregularity in our counterparty's billing, saved us a significant sum. Her name was Grant, I believe." The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. "Tell me everything you know about that situation," Min-ho said. What came back over the next 3 days was not comfortable information. The associate who had flagged the irregularity in the Yu International counterparty contracts, the one that had saved the company a significant sum, had been Talia Grant. The counterparty whose irregularity she had flagged had quietly retaliated. They had used a contact at Harmon and Cress, a colleague of Talia's, to manufacture the internal accusation that had ended her career. The colleague's name was Derek Voss. The company Derek Voss had been in contact with was a development firm. The development firm was Weston Parks, the man who had cornered Sue in the hallway. Min-ho sat with this information for a long time. He sat with the geometry of it, the way a woman had protected his business 2 years before she ever set foot in his house, and the way the man who had been responsible for her destruction had been standing in his home drinking his whiskey. He sat with the fact that she did not know any of this. And he sat with the question of what it meant that he knew it, and what he was going to do. What he was not going to do, he was certain of this, was tell her without being prepared for what it would cost both of them. November came. Miami didn't do autumn the way the rest of the country did. No drama of leaves, no permission to feel melancholy about the cold. But the light shifted, going gold and long in the late afternoons, and the air off the bay developed an edge that made it breathable in a way July never allowed. Talia had started, without deciding to, leaving the kitchen window open when she prepped the morning coffee. It was a small thing, The smell of salt water and the sound of the bay in the early morning had become something she organized her mornings around. She had also started, without deciding to, noticing Min-ho differently. Not the way she would have noticed a man she was interested in. She had disciplined that thought every time it tried to form, pressed it flat with the ease of someone who had spent 11 months pressing difficult things flat. It was more specific than that. She noticed the way he moved around Sue, the deliberateness of it, the way he asked questions instead of directing, the way he sat at the boy's height when they talked, his forearms on his knees, his attention complete. He was not a warm father in the demonstrative sense, but he was entirely present, in a way that she recognized, from the best lawyers she had worked with, the ones who made their clients feel like the most important case in the room, as a particular form of love. It undid something in her chest she hadn't known was still tied. On a Thursday in the second week of November, Sue had been asking her about South American rivers for 3 days, a direct continuation of the Amazon Megadelta conversation. Min-ho appeared in the hallway, while she and Sue were sprawled on the floor with the geography encyclopedia open between them. Sue pointing to tributaries with one finger while she confirmed or corrected his pronunciation. He stopped in the doorway. Sue looked up and waved, which was, in Sue's economy of gesture, approximately equivalent to throwing a parade. Min-ho looked at the scene, the encyclopedia, Talia's crossed legs, his son's complete ease, and his expression did something she had not seen it do before. It softened, not into weakness, into something that looked like relief. He says the Orinoco has a bifurcation, Sue said, pointing at Talia. Is that a real word? Min-ho said gently. And yes, it means a river that splits in two. Sue filed this away with the gravity of a 7-year-old archiving important data. I might want to see it someday. We can plan a trip, Min-ho said. And then, so quietly she wasn't entirely sure it was directed at her. We'll see. She pretended to study the map page. The tips of her ears were warm. That night, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the small staff room she occupied on the ground floor, listening to the bay, and thinking about the precise and specific danger of a man who made his son feel like the most important thing in the room, and who had been, for the past several weeks, making her feel like she existed. She thought about Gerald's words, about needing something being the same as losing. She thought about the document inquiry, still grinding forward in the background, her attorney's updates coming in emails she read with the same focused care she'd given every case file for 8 years. She thought about Talia Grant, senior associate. Talia Grant, who had earned everything she had and had it taken anyway. Talia Grant, who was currently lying on a staff room mattress in someone else's house, thinking about someone she absolutely could not afford to think about. She closed her eyes. She thought about him anyway. The conversation that broke things open happened on a Saturday. Min-ho had given most of the staff the day off, a rare gesture, delivered through Mrs. Lim without explanation. Gerald had gone to visit his sister in Fort Lauderdale. Mrs. Lim had left at noon. Talia had stayed, ostensibly to manage the house, but truthfully because she had nowhere she particularly wanted to be. Sue was at a classmate's birthday party until 5. The house was the quietest she had ever known it. She was in the library, the one room she had quietly decided was her favorite, stacked floor to ceiling with books in Korean and English and what looked like Japanese, returning several volumes to their shelves when Min-ho appeared at the door. He was not in his usual work clothes, jeans, a dark sweater. He looked, she thought, significantly more human. You stayed, he said. Someone should be here. He nodded. He stepped inside and looked at the shelves, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a room full of books. What are you reading? He asked, looking at the book she had not yet shelved. She looked at the spine. Korean civil procedure. Comparatively. I was curious how it maps to U.S. practice. He looked at her for a long moment. You're still thinking like a lawyer. I'm still a lawyer. The suspension doesn't change the thinking. Just the license. He sat down in one of the leather chairs. Not commanding. Just sitting, Tell me what happened. Not the version you told me before. The full version. She almost said no. The word formed and then dissolved. She was so tired of carrying it alone. She sat down in the opposite chair. She told him. All of it. The contracts. The billing irregularity she'd flagged. The client who had seemed embarrassed and then gone quiet. Derek Voss's accusation appearing 3 months later like something planted. The investigation that had felt predetermined. The morning she'd been escorted out of a building she'd given 8 years to. The way her colleagues had stopped returning calls. Not all at once, but one by one. The way lights go out in a building at the end of the day. She did not cry. She had not cried about any of it since the first week, when she'd cried enough to last some time. What she felt now was something colder and more structural, the anger of someone who has had their architecture dismantled and knows exactly which bolt was pulled first. When she finished, the library was very quiet. Minho was looking at his hands. He had been still throughout, not the closed stillness of someone who wasn't listening, but the gathered stillness of someone who was listening more carefully than they were willing to show. Talia, he said, just her name. The way he said it stopped something in her chest. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. She looked at him. He told her. The sole attorney, the counterparty contracts. The irregularity she had flagged 2 years ago that had saved you international money she hadn't even known was at risk. Weston Park, Derek Voss. The chain that led, directly and documentably, from her act of professional integrity 2 years ago to the destruction of her career 11 months ago. The room was very still. How long have you known? Her voice was very level. 12 days. 12. She stopped. Started again. You've known for 12 days. Yes. And you said nothing. I was trying to determine the best way. The best way. She stood up. The anger was clean and clear, and she was grateful for it. Grateful for its precision. I have been in this house for 6 weeks. I have been navigating 11 months of having my reputation destroyed for doing my job correctly. And you have been sitting on information that is directly relevant to my inquiry for 12 days because you were trying to determine... Because I didn't know what it would cost you to hear it, he said, quietly. Without flinching, that stopped her. That's not your decision to make, she said, but the sharpest edge of it had rounded slightly. No, it wasn't. I know that. She walked to the window. The bay was doing its late afternoon thing, all bronze and movement, aggressively beautiful. She pressed her fingertips to the glass. You saved my career, he said, from behind her. 2 years ago, without knowing who I was, you saved my company significant money, and then the people I did business with destroyed yours. I have been sitting across from you in this house for 6 weeks not knowing that, and when I found out... He stopped. She could hear him choosing words with unusual care. I did not know how to be the person who told you. I handled it badly. I'm sorry. The apology landed in the quiet between them. She had expected many things from Minho Yu. She had not expected an apology that didn't reach for anything in return. She kept looking at the bay. I need to call my attorney, she said. Yes. Tonight. The documentation my attorney has gathered is available to you. All of it. Without conditions. She turned from the window. He was standing now, several feet away, looking at her with an expression that was the most unguarded she had seen on his face, completely without armor. Thank you, she said. The 2 words cost her something. He nodded. She left the library. She called her attorney. She sat on the edge of the staff room bed and listened to the sound of an entire case beginning to shift on its axis. She did not go back to the library that night. But she thought about his face in it for a very long time. For 4 days, they were careful with each other. Not cold. Nothing as clear or useful as cold. More like people moving through a space that had been rearranged and was now slightly unfamiliar. They were professional, courteous. She did her work. He did his. Sue, who understood more than adults generally credited, seemed to sense something had shifted and was quieter than usual, appearing in rooms with his encyclopedia and reading without commentary. On the 5th day, Talia's attorney called with news. The documentation from Minho's sole attorney, combined with records Talia had already preserved, and a statement from a paralegal at Harmon and Kress who had witnessed the conversation between Voss and Park's firm contact, was, in the attorney's measured professional language, substantially dispositive. The bar inquiry would almost certainly conclude in her favor. The timeline she was looking at was 60 to 90 days. She sat in the staff room and pressed her hands flat on the table and let herself feel it, the full weight of what that meant. 60 to 90 days. Her license. Her name. She stayed like that for a long time. Then she went and found Minho on the terrace. He was sitting with a document, but he wasn't reading it. He was watching the bay. She sat down in the chair across from him. He looked at her, and the wariness in his face, the uncertainty of a man who doesn't know where he stands, was something she hadn't expected and couldn't look away from. My attorney called. The inquiry is moving. 60 to 90 days to reinstatement. The wariness shifted. That's good news. The best I've had in a year. The bay moved between them in the silence. When I'm reinstated, she said, slowly, I'll need to leave. I'll need to rebuild. Get a position somewhere, or open my own practice. I've been thinking about that more and more. Compliance consulting, maybe. Independent. Yes. I'm saying that so you understand what the timeline looks like. From my end. I'm not someone who is in a position to be anything other than what I am right now, which is employed in your house and trying to get my life back. He looked at her steadily. I understand. Do you? You're telling me not to want something that doesn't have a clear place to exist yet. Yes. I understand. The plainness of it disarmed her. I'm not saying never, she said, before she could stop herself. He was very still. I'm saying not now. Not while things are like this. Not while I'm... She stopped and started again. I need to be standing on my own ground when I decide anything. I need the ground to be mine. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I can wait. You don't know how long? No, but I know what I'm waiting for. The bay caught the last of the afternoon light and threw it back at them. She stood up. He stood up. Reflex or something else. She wasn't sure. They were closer than they usually were. She could see the line of his jaw, the particular careful steadiness in his face. Thank you, she said. For the documents. For the information. For not... She paused. For not making it a transaction. It was never a transaction, he said. She walked back inside before either of them could say anything more. In the kitchen, Gerald looked up from whatever he was doing and then looked immediately back down, with the specific discretion of someone who has seen something and is choosing to respect it. Coffee? He asked. Please, she said. The inquiry concluded 73 days after Talia's attorney received the documentation. January 14th. She was in the kitchen when the call came. Gerald had the day off, the house was quiet, and she sat on the counter in her work uniform with her phone pressed to her ear while her attorney, who was not a demonstrative person, told her in a voice that was nevertheless warm with satisfaction that the Florida bar had concluded its investigation and found in her favor. Her license was reinstated effective immediately. The findings regarding Derek Voss and the coordinated nature of the complaint had been referred to the appropriate authorities. Weston Park's firm, her attorney added, was facing a separate civil action. And Derek Voss, her attorney said his name with the particular flatness of someone who had been waiting to say it, had been let go from Harmon and Kress the previous week, quietly, the way firms let people go when they know something is coming. She sat with that for a moment. Derek Voss, who had smiled at her every morning for 3 years. Derek Voss, who had sat 3 offices down while she built something he had then taken 11 months to dismantle. She waited to feel something large, rage or satisfaction or grief. What came instead was smaller and cleaner. The specific relief of a weight being lifted from a place you had stopped noticing it was pressing. She said, "Thank you." She said it 3 times, because 3 times felt correct. Then she ended the call and sat on the counter and pressed both palms flat on the cool marble and let herself feel it, the way she had not let herself feel the earlier news. The full, final, irrevocable weight of it. Talia Grant, attorney at law. Reinstated. She did not cry. She smiled, the real one, the one she hadn't used in a year, the one that arrived from somewhere below the level of control and simply happened. She was still sitting there when she heard footsteps. Minho appeared in the kitchen doorway with a document under his arm and stopped when he saw her face. He read it the way he read everything, quickly, completely. "The inquiry," he said, "concluded in my favor." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stopped in front of her. She was still on the counter, which put them nearly at eye level, and looked at her with everything down. "Congratulations," he said. The word was quiet and total. "I'm going to need to give notice," she said. "Properly. I'll stay through the month if that helps the transition." "I know. I meant what I said on the terrace. I know that too." The kitchen was very quiet. The bay was doing its silver morning thing outside the window. "Minho," she said. His name, for the first time. Something shifted in his face. Small and complete. "I need 60 days to find a space, set up the practice, make sure I'm standing where I said I would be standing." He was very still. 60 days, she said. "And then I'd like to have dinner with you. If you're in Miami, if you want to." "I'll be in Miami," he said. Immediately. Without hesitation. She smiled again. The real one. He reached out, and very briefly, barely the length of a breath, touched her hand where it rested on the counter. Then he straightened, tucked the document under his arm, and walked back out of the kitchen with complete composure. She laughed, quietly, into the kitchen, into the morning, and it sounded like something that had been stored too long finally being let out into the air. She suspected, for the first time in 11 months, that things were going to be all right. The restaurant was not in Miami Beach. It was in the Design District, a small place with 20 tables and a kitchen that took its time, and a terrace that looked out over a courtyard full of trees that had been there since long before the neighborhood had been fashionable. Talia had chosen it. She had a feeling Minho went to the kind of places that were chosen for him, and she wanted him to see what she chose. Grant Compliance Consulting had opened its doors 9 days before, on the 15th floor of a brickle building she had stood in front of for 5 minutes before going inside, hands in pockets, feeling the kind of nerves that live in the same neighborhood as Joy. The practice was small. Her, a paralegal she trusted, and a roster of 3 initial clients who had found her through word of mouth in the 6 weeks between reinstatement and launch. It was not what she had had before. It was better, in the ways that mattered. She arrived at the restaurant 2 minutes before 8. He was already there. He stood when he saw her. Not as a performance, just as the thing his body did. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, and he looked like a man who had spent 62 days being careful about something he did not entirely want to be careful about. She sat down across from him. "Sue sends his regards," he said. "He has moved on from Rivers. He's in a phase about tectonic plates. Naturally." She picked up the menu. "Did you know that the North American and Eurasian plates are moving apart at about the rate fingernails grow?" "I did not know that." He told me, in a voice message, 3 days ago. Minho looked at her across the table. "He's been in contact with you. He has a lot of geological opinions, and apparently no other available audience. He has me. You're not as good at continental drift as I am," she said. He smiled. The full version, the one she had seen exactly twice before. It rearranged his face entirely. The waiter came. They ordered. The courtyard trees did their thing in the evening air. "How is it?" he asked. "The practice." "Terrifying," Good. She set her menu down. The kind of terrifying that means you're doing the right thing. Yes, he said. I know that kind. She looked at him. The careful stillness of him. The steadiness. The way he paid attention, the way other people spent money, as though it were the most valuable thing he had. When do you go back to Seoul? She asked. March. For 4 weeks. Sue stays. He's settled in his school here, and I prefer not to disrupt his routine, unless something significant comes up. And the Miami residence is ours for the foreseeable future. Miami has advantages I had underestimated. He was looking at her when he said it. She thought about the woman she had been standing at that service entrance in October, the uniform, the pressed collar, the word temporary, working overtime. She thought about 11 months of carrying a weight that had never been hers to carry. She thought about the library, and the terrace, and a 7-year-old boy who had told her she missed a spot, and about being seen, really seen, in a hallway after she had put herself between a drunk man and a child, without once thinking about the cost. She picked up her wine glass. To Miami, she said. He lifted his glass. His eyes did not leave hers. To Miami, he said, and to the woman who didn't bow. The glasses met. Outside, the courtyard trees moved in the warm March air, and the city went on being loud and bright and alive around two people who had, against all reasonable odds, found each other in the specific and improbable way that real things sometimes happen. Not in a grand gesture or a calculated moment, but in a hallway, at 7:30 in the evening, when one of them had chosen to stand still when everything in her situation said she should keep moving. She had not bowed. She had never bowed, and that, in the end, was everything.